What happens when a quiet woman who has spent her entire life standing at the stove suddenly dares to speak up? In a house where she was nobody, it sets off a chain of events that will expose everything the family has so carefully hidden. What happened next left the entire room speechless. The kitchen window fogged up from the inside. Behind it stood January trees, crooked with bare branches, like old people leaning against each other in despair. Inside, it smelled of potato peelings, bay leaves, and a rag that Mariana was wringing out for the third time, each time a little harder. She was washing the floor, but it wasn't just a floor. It was a foreign space where every step felt like a crime. The gray-beige tiles, streaked with age, creaked under the brush. Above her, an old lamp covered in dust buzzed loudly. Somewhere behind the door on the second floor, a spoon clattered against porcelain. Esther was asking for porridge again, but her voice was no longer commanding, but pleading, like a child who had forgotten that she once knew how to give orders. Mariana stood up, straightening slowly, as if from the depths of a well. Her lower back protested, but she had grown accustomed to not listening to her body, or to herself for that matter. "I have to be ready before dinner," she said aloud, as if someone were listening. But there was no one to hear her. Only the dog, as old as everything else in the house, lay under the radiator and twitched its ear slightly. It did not bark. It simply accepted as fact that the woman was talking to the void again. Marianne glanced at the stove. The pot was bubbling. Chicken broth, light, without spices. For Esther. The old woman didn't eat anything else. She said once, "It's the only thing that keeps me warm." Mariana just nodded then. She accepted a lot here without saying anything. It was as if there was a sign in the house that said, "Words are a luxury. Smiles are forbidden." She took out a clean towel, sat down, and began to scrub the spoons. Not because they needed cleaning, but because her hands couldn't stop working. If she stopped, thoughts would come. And thoughts, as we all know, don't pay the rent. The door slammed, quickly, angrily. Annabelle was back. Mariana crouched down slightly, as if the sound of footsteps in the hall were a warning. "Are you cooking that again?" came from the doorway. "The whole house smells. Now I have to wash my coat." Mariana didn't turn around. She just kept scrubbing the spoon as if she hadn't heard. "I asked you." The voice grew louder, the tone higher, like someone who had known since childhood that if you shout, you won't be interrupted. "Do you understand that people are allergic to chicken?" "It's for Esther," Marianne said quietly. Her voice was even slightly soft, like a teacher in a class where the children have long since lost respect for her, but she still doesn't lose face. Annabelle snorted, threw her scarf onto the kitchen chair, the very one where Mariana had been mending the tablecloth just yesterday. "Of course. All for Mom," she said sarcastically. "And who are you here? The cook? The nanny? Or do you have a new title now?" Marianne didn't answer. She never ran out of words. She just knew the value of each phrase. Sometimes silence is the only thing that cannot be insulted. "You know," Annabelle approached, standing too close, "you like playing family. But we all know who you are. Just a woman off the street who was taken in out of pity? Don't forget your place." With that, she took a spoon from the drying rack, one of the ones that had just been shining, and threw it back into the sink. "We don't serve with dirty spoons," she said as she left. "Remember that?" The door slammed again. The rag in Mariana's hand was hot. Or maybe it was her palms that were burning. She crouched down and slowly picked up the spoon from the sink. She ran her finger along the edge and washed it again. Only now, not for Esther, for herself. Because someone in this house had to respect her work. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Mariana wiped her hands on her apron and silently walked over to the table where the old spice jars stood. They stood along the wall like soldiers, long since discharged, but still occupying their places out of habit. Esther, the former owner of the house, had once kept them in alphabetical order. Now no one cared about the order, except Mariana. She opened the lid of the cinnamon jar. It was empty. She closed it and put it back in its place. Then she took out the bay leaf jar. There was only one left. She broke it in half. One half went into the pot, the other remained in her palm. And for some reason, it suddenly occurred to her someone had once divided bread in the same way, in half, for themselves and for those who needed it more. And now she was dividing spices so that there would be enough respect, at least in taste. "You've always been too soft," Esther said from behind the door, hoarsely but clearly. "That's why they walk all over you." Mariana shuddered, not because of the words, but because of how accurately they applied to today. She didn't answer. She just stood frozen at the stove, as if the bay leaf had turned to stone in her hand. "It's not a reproach," Esther continued slowly, as if sorting through her thoughts. "Just a statement of fact. A woman who remains silent signs her own death warrant. And then she's surprised when she's kept in the hallway." Mariana pretended to stir the soup. In reality, she just needed to do something with her hands, otherwise they would start shaking. From anger? From shame? From the truth? "I don't need pity," she said curtly. "I'm just doing what I can." "That's the problem," Esther replied. "You do everything, but you forget about yourself. It suits them." Again, there was no response. Marianne felt something tighten inside her. It was as if these words had been inside her for a long time, but no one had ever said them out loud. And now they were out in the open, and they weren't going away. Her gaze fell on the photo on the refrigerator. It was old and slightly faded. It showed a young Thomas, Esther's son, with some of his relatives. They were all wearing white shirts and sitting at a long table. There wasn't a single stranger in sight. Not a single stranger. Mariana wasn't there, and she never would be. She moved closer and ran her finger along the corner of the photo. There was a smudge of grease. One of the children had touched the photo with their hands. Or maybe it was a tear after all. Her fingers trembled. "You never ask for anything?" Esther said, her voice quieter, as if she were speaking in a whisper. "That means you're nobody to them." And then, for the first time, Mariana felt that the air in the kitchen had become heavy, not from the cooking, but from the truth she would have to swallow. Somewhere above, a switch clicked. Annabelle had turned the heater back on in her room. The rest would have to survive as best they could. Marianne returned to the stove. She took an egg out of the bowl and tapped it against the edge of the pot. It cracked. A piece fell right into the broth. She didn't bother to fish it out. Sometimes even soup doesn't filter out the truth. We've reached a breaking point. What happens next will turn everything upside down. You can't miss the ending of this story. The house stood on a hill, as if proud to belong to those who never asked for anything. Old, with peeling plaster, but with columns at the entrance, symbols of former importance. Once it was full of voices, guests, laughter. Now only footsteps could be heard inside, unfamiliar, discordant, sharp as needles under the fingernails. Mariana lived on the first floor in an annex called the maid's room. A small window, thin walls, a wardrobe in which everything was hung according to the season, but always seemed foreign. There were no belongings of hers there. Only things given to her for the time being, which had imperceptibly turned into 5 years. 3 people lived in the house. Esther, confined to a wheelchair, but with eyes that still held control. Thomas, her son, a man with a straight back and a closed forehead, as if he were always looking inside himself. And Annabelle, her niece, who had come to help, but for some reason had not left. Every morning began the same way. Mariana was the first to get up. She lit the old stove, cooked porridge, heated water, and took out fresh towels. If something squeaked, she immediately oiled it. If something was drafty, she put a rag over it. Her presence was unnoticeable, and that was part of the deal. Thomas rarely spoke to her. His words were dry and measured. "Thanks. The doctors are at 10 today. Don't forget your medicine." Never, "How did you sleep?" or "Are you tired?" Sometimes in the evenings, he would linger in the kitchen longer than he should. He didn't look her in the eye, just sat at the table as if waiting for something. Or he was remembering. Or he was afraid to speak. Mariana was silent, because she had already learned that in this house, extra words were paid for with loneliness. With Esther, everything was more complicated. At times, she was gentle. At other times, she was as hard as a leather belt from childhood. She could take her by the hand and then reproach her with a look as if Mariana had too many feelings on her face. In her world, women like Mariana were necessary but unworthy of equal status. Annabelle was a mirror that reflected the entire system. Young, well-groomed, with a voice that could melt glass when she felt powerful. "Don't put the mugs like that, it's ugly." "You speak too slowly." "Thomas doesn't like it when you look like that." No one said it directly, but there was an unspoken message in the house. "You're not one of us." A portrait hung on the wall in the hall. The entire family, Esther in the center, Thomas on her right, Annabelle on the side. Mary Ann was not in the portrait, and not because the picture was old. It was simply because no one had invited her. Sometimes she imagined what she would look like in that photo. It was ridiculous, of course. In someone else's apron with empty hands. In the background, not a person, a piece of decor. In the evenings, when the house became too quiet, she would sit on an old stool in the kitchen and listen. Every creak was someone else's footsteps. Every knock was someone else's decision. She had long since given up waiting for gratitude, but sometimes she caught herself looking for someone to look at her, just so that someone would notice. She wasn't a shadow. One such night, Esther called out to her, "You don't think Thomas will make something of you, do you?" Mary Ann didn't answer, because the voice inside her was already whispering, "Do you even believe that was ever true?" In the morning, the house smelled of boiled carrots and cold tea. Esther was being capricious again. First she was cold, then her pillow was like in a hospice. Then Mariana was breathing too loudly. Thomas, as usual, left early, leaving behind a list of chores written in his neat, restrained handwriting. Even in small things, he tried to keep his distance. Mary Ann brought Esther a blanket, adjusted her pillow, and put a hot water bottle at her feet. Esther snorted and turned away toward the window. "It's not as hot as before. It's new. The old one leaked." "Everything leaks in this house now. Even the people." Mary Ann didn't answer. Other words were spinning in her head. At night she had heard Thomas talking to someone on the phone for a long time. About her. Not out loud, but she recognized herself by the tone of his voice. "Yes, she's still here." "No, she hasn't left." "Yes, she's fine." And then a pause. A long one. As if the person on the other end had asked not what was being said out loud, but what was usually hidden. The answer was quiet. "I don't know what to do about it." About it. Not her. About it. Mary Ann didn't leave the kitchen until lunchtime. She washed the floor and wiped the glass on the front door for the third time, even though there was no dust or fingerprints left. She just needed to do something, otherwise her hands would turn into fists. And fists in this house were an unaffordable luxury. At exactly 4 o'clock, a car pulled into the yard. Black, shiny, unfamiliar. Mary Ann looked out the window and immediately felt her stomach clench. A woman got out of the car, tall with a straight back, wearing a coat the color of wet asphalt and high-heeled boots. In her hand was a bag that wasn't for shopping, but for court or funerals. Behind her were two teenagers. Mariana didn't know them, but Annabelle, standing in the hall, straightened up as if on cue and exhaled. "Well, they're here." "Who are they?" asked Mariana. Annabelle did not look in her direction. "Family, the real one." The door slammed. A woman entered the house. Without looking back or taking off her coat, as if she owned everything there, the walls, the floor, the air. She headed toward Esther without greeting anyone. Behind her were teenagers with indifferent faces and phones in their hands. Esther greeted them with feigned weakness. "Molly, dear, I thought you weren't coming." "Yeah, me too. But we have to sort things out while you're still alive, Mom." Marianne froze at the door. The scene was not for her, but she became the backdrop against which everything unfolded. Molly looked around. Her gaze fell on Mariana and immediately slid past her as if she were a shadow on a coat rack. Then it fell on the kitchen, on the pot of soup. "Who's cooking?" "Her," said Annabelle. "She's kind of running the show here." Marianne felt a lump in her throat. It was as if someone had punched her in the chest and wouldn't let her breathe. Molly turned around and squinted. "Since when did we have an open cafe here?" "Who is she?" And at that moment, everything changed. Not because it was a scream, but because it was the first crack in the role that Mariana had been playing for too long. In the evening, the house smelled of minced meat and resentment. Meat pie was being prepared for dinner, but the atmosphere was more like minced people. Marianne stood at the sink, listening to Molly and Thomas arguing in the next room. The tone was polite, but the words were like knives. "You're letting her stay here?" It sounded quiet, but with an intonation as if he were talking about a border violator. "She takes care of Mom. I can't just—" "Are you a man or a boy?" Molly interrupted. "She lives in a house where everyone pretends she doesn't exist, and you just keep quiet." Mariana couldn't see their faces, but she could read everything in their words. She. Not a name, not a person, a noun that needed to be swept out the door with a broom. She returned to the kitchen and began drying the already washed plates. One slipped and almost fell, but she caught it. She thought, too bad it didn't break. At least that would have been a reason to scream. No one spoke to her at dinner. She served the salad, put the bread on the table, poured the water. Then she sat down in the corner like a dog that had been taken in temporarily. Thomas didn't look at her once, not even gratefully. Not at all. "What do you think?" Molly asked suddenly. Mariana flinched. "Excuse me? Do you think it's normal to live here? Not ask questions, not explain anything?" The fork in her hand froze. She felt her face burn. Where did this woman get the power to ask questions, as if she had the keys not only to the doors, but also to her self-esteem? I don't interfere." "Exactly," Molly smiled. "Convenient, isn't it?" Annabelle smiled. Esther turned away. Thomas continued chewing as if they were discussing something far away, some kind of renovation, or finance courses. "Maybe you consider yourself part of the family," Molly added, not letting up. "Come on, say it out loud." Mariana swallowed hard. "I'm just trying to be helpful." The silence after those words was louder than a scream. Even the dishes seemed to freeze on the table, unwilling to clink. Later in her room, she sat on her bed, hugging her knees. The small lamp glowed dimly, and everything in the room looked yellow, like an old photograph. Ridiculous, of course. In this house, even the light refused to be white. Phrases spun around in her head. "Say it out loud." "Do you consider yourself part of the family?" What would she have answered if she hadn't been afraid? If she hadn't been used to keeping quiet? "Yes, damn it. I sleep here, clean, cook, take care of their mother, listen to their arguments, worry more than they do. I am part of this house, whether they like it or not. But the words stayed inside. As always, the next morning the air in the house was thick, like yesterday's soup. No one raised their voice, but every step, every glance betrayed irritation, as if Marianne was to blame for not disappearing during the night, as would have been convenient for everyone. She cleared the dishes, wiped up the crumbs, and made tea. Everything was as usual, only inside there was no longer silence. Something sharp was growing there. Not anger, no. More like fatigue from her own silence. It was as if someone had kept the lid on a pot for 10 years, and now it was finally boiling. "Did you wash my pants?" Annabelle called from the stairs. Marianne stood by the window holding a cup of tea. "No," she said calmly. "I didn't know I was supposed to." There was a pause. Almost cheerful, absurd, like in a scene where someone forgot their lines. "What?" Annabelle asked, already appearing in the doorway. "What did you say?" "I didn't know I was supposed to wash the clothes of people who think I'm a nobody." Annabelle blinked. Then she smiled. "Seriously? You decided to talk? After all these years? Who are you now? A guest? The owner's wife?" "I'm just a person," Marianne replied quietly, "and I'm tired of being invisible." Molly appeared behind Annabelle. She was holding a cup of coffee and looked as if she were watching a show from the front row. "Finally," she said. "It's starting." Marianne slowly dried her hands with a towel. Her heart was pounding in her throat like a spoon in an empty teapot. She was afraid, but she didn't stop. "If I live here, if I take care of your mother, cook your meals, clean your house, I deserve at least some respect." "Respect?" Annabelle laughed. "You came here barefoot and without a name. Thomas took pity on you, and here you are. Don't confuse gratitude with rights." "I didn't ask for anything," Mariana said almost in a whisper, but her voice didn't waver. "He opened the door himself." Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Thomas. He stopped at the top, looking down. Several seconds passed without a word. It was as if he were a judge who had lost the indictment. "Thomas," Annabelle began, "did you hear that?" "I heard," he said calmly, "but I'm not getting involved." "Of course." "A man." And she left, her heels clicking as if she were trampling on her own irritation. Marianne was left alone. Molly finished her coffee, nodded to her, almost respectfully for the first time, and walked past without a word or a glance. It wasn't a relief. It was cold. Now everything had changed. She had broken the rule. No one else in this house would pretend she was just a maid anymore. Now she was a threat, because she had spoken up. In the afternoon, Marianne went into the garden, not for fresh air, but for a break. Almost no one was there, only the wind and wet leaves stuck to the stone paths. It smelled of earth, old grass, and something that wasn't there. Peace. Someone was already sitting on the bench by the apple tree. A girl. 10, 12 at most. A dark jacket, leggings, a hood pulled back over her head. She was looking at her phone screen and sucking on something sour, judging by the expression on her face. "Hi," Mariana said as she walked by. "Are you the owner?" asked the girl without looking up. "No," smiled Mariana. "No one here knows who anyone else is." The girl looked up. Her eyes were black and alert, like those of someone who had long since learned not to trust adults. "Are you Mariana?" "Yes." "I'm Liv, Molly's daughter. She says you're like furniture here. But Dad said you make the best pancakes." Marianne froze. Pancakes? She had made them once, on a rainy evening when one of Molly's relatives had gotten stuck in the house for the night. No one had even thanked her then. But someone remembered the taste. Thanks for saying so, she replied quietly. You don't look like furniture. Liv shrugged. Your eyes are alive. My mom says that's bad. Bad to be alive? Number. It's bad if a servant doesn't look at the floor. Mariana snorted. Your mom is strict. She's just scared all the time. She just pretends she's not. It runs in the family. Liv put her phone away and looked her straight in the face. Are you angry? All the time, Mariana said honestly. Why don't you yell at her? Because I know how to fry pancakes, and angry pancakes burn. Liv laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it was genuine. They sat in silence. It was cool, but not cold enough to make them shiver. The air just felt fresh, not around them, but inside them. Before leaving, Liv asked, Do you live here because you want to? Or because you have nowhere else to go? Marianne thought about it. Probably because I haven't asked myself that question in a long time. Liv nodded, like an adult. If my mom gets mad, she said, tell her I like you. I remember you now. You're not a piece of furniture. The next morning began differently. Mariana woke up before dawn, not because of noise or back pain as usual, but because someone called her name in her sleep. Not hey, not excuse me, not listen, but for real. Simple. Warm. Mariana. And when she woke up, she thought for a moment that this was her home. In the kitchen, she turned on the stove and took out flour, yeast, and butter. She moved slowly, but without her usual fuss. She spread an old linen tablecloth on the table, not because anyone was coming, but because she wanted it to look nice, at least for herself. The flatbreads turned out thin with bubbles and crispy edges. She cooked them silently but with pleasure, and that was new. It smells like childhood, Esther said as she rolled by in her wheelchair. Her voice was softer than usual. It was as if the smell had brought back a piece of what had long been lost. Marianne didn't answer. She just handed her a flatbread on a napkin. With butter, no salt, just the way you like it. You remember such little things, Esther said in surprise. I don't know whether to be happy or scared. Later, Liv came back to the garden. She was holding a book with crumpled pages. It's all about strong women, she said, not looking up. Only they're so... too beautiful. You're like the real thing. Like you really live. I do live, Mariana smiled. Just quietly. They sat in the shade, discussing the heroine of the novel, who had run away from a wealthy home and become the captain of a ship. Liv listened, furrowing her brow and asking questions. Have you ever run away? She asked. I left, but I always came back. Why? Because I thought everything would fall apart without me. What if it didn't? Marianne looked toward the house. That's the scariest part. In the evening, Thomas came into the kitchen. He hadn't been in there without a reason for a long time, but this time he stopped at the door, sniffed the air, and said, Flatbread? Yes. It smells like warmth. She turned to him, for the first time in a long time, and looked him straight in the eyes. Warmth isn't food. It's when someone asks you, how are you? He lowered his eyes. Are you okay? Better, she replied. Not out of politeness, but out of truth. Thomas sat down at the table. He was silent for a moment. Then he asked, They think you're here by accident. Do you think otherwise? I don't want to think anymore. I want to be. And if that makes someone uncomfortable, they can move on. He nodded. No argument, no hint of irony, just a nod, like a man who finally understood something. Maybe not everything, but it was a start. Mariana couldn't sleep that night. She lay there listening to the house, Footsteps, taps, Esther's hoarse breathing, the creaking of Thomas's sofa. None of it was hers. But that evening, for the first time, she felt that it wasn't foreign either. She turned on her side and covered herself better. Her lips tasted salty from tears, but not from pain, from the fact that today they had seen her, at least a little. Closer to noon, the house was unusually quiet. Even Annabelle wasn't clicking her heels. Even Esther didn't ask for a blanket. Thomas had left in the morning as if on purpose, so as not to see the tension thickening in the air. Only Liv walked around the house barefoot, occasionally peeking into the kitchen, not for food, but just because. Mariana poured her some water, put an apple on the table, and the girl left without saying goodbye, but always with gratitude in her eyes. They sat with Esther in the living room. Mariana read aloud, an old newspaper, because the old woman's head couldn't take novels and politics didn't matter anymore. Suddenly the door flew open, not with a creak, but with a bang. Molly stood in the doorway, holding an envelope. The paper looked like it came from a notary's office, and her face was tense. "We need to talk," she said, immediately turning her gaze to Marianne. "Alone." "I'm not leaving if you want to discuss something that concerns me," Marianne said calmly, but standing up. Molly walked over to the table, put down the envelope, and opened it like a surgeon preparing for an operation. "The will," she said curtly. "Mom changed it." 3 months ago. Esther sighed but didn't intervene. She sat as if she had rehearsed this scene in advance and knew that her lines weren't coming. "Half of the estate goes to her," Molly nodded toward Marianne. "For her care, for her presence, for staying when the others left. That's what it says here. You can read it yourself." The room grew cold, even without the wind, even without words. "Are you part of the family now?" Molly spoke emphatically, but her voice betrayed her fear. "Who are you anyway? Who are you to be here when you show up with security and lawyers?" Marianne interrupted. "I'm the one who stayed." Molly moved closer. "Does Thomas know? The will is his mother's. I didn't ask. You took advantage of her weakness. You sat here like a mouse and waited. I lived here. I cooked soup. I cleaned his wounds. I changed his sheets. And you wrote messages about how hard it was to be his daughter." "You won't be the mistress here," Molly hissed. "Even if they sign the whole house over to you. You're nobody." "If I were nobody, you wouldn't be angry," Marianne replied. Quietly, directly, looking her in the eye. Esther said nothing. She just took the blanket off her knees as if she had suddenly become hot. When Molly left, slamming the door behind her, Marianne remained standing in the middle of the room, not triumphant, not victorious, with an empty heart. Because now everything was different. Now it was war, and there was no turning back. They didn't say it out loud. Not Thomas, not Esther, not even Annabelle. But from that day on, the house became quieter, hollow, as if the walls had absorbed the scream that never came out. Marianne sensed that something had shifted, something dangerous, not in the papers, in the relationships. At first, the little things disappeared. They stopped bringing water to her room. She now cut her own bread, and for some reason the knife was in a different drawer every time. Esther's blanket had disappeared, and when she asked Annabelle, she just shrugged. "Maybe ask the new owner. You're the heir now." Mariana didn't answer. She just went and got a new one herself. One of the ones wrapped in cellophane in the closet, in case someone comes. But no one came. Only she lived here, every day. And then Thomas began to disappear. In the morning, coffee and "I'll be late." In the evening, a shadow in the hallway and silence in response to her "good evening." It was as if he was learning to be aloof again, as if trying to forget that he had once invited her under his roof. Esther became cold again, not spiteful, just cold. I'm an old woman. I can be forgiven, she said when Mariana reminded her about her medication for the third time. But you can't. Excuse me? Did you think you could buy everything with kindness? Love? A place? A name? It doesn't work that way. It never has. One evening, Liv didn't come. She didn't come to the garden or the kitchen or even look out the window. Mariana waited. Then she went upstairs. She knocked. Silence. She knocked again. Silence. The next morning, she heard Molly say to Annabelle, "Don't you go near that girl again. I don't care if she liked her. Let her cook her soups and mind her own business." Annabelle smiled. "Now you're talking like one of us." And that was the moment when Mariana realized she had been reduced to nothing again. It was as if all the kind words, the pies, the hugs, the tears meant nothing. The paper hadn't brought her closer. On the contrary, it had made her a threat. Accidents began to happen in the house. Laundry not put away on time. Curtains moved, even though she hadn't touched them. A cup that she, supposedly, broke. Everything was petty, insignificant. But everything was deliberate. Once she found an empty box from Esther's jewelry in her room. Just on the bed. No words, no accusations. Only Annabelle's look after dinner. Like a sentence. Marianne went to Thomas. "This is going too far," she said. "I don't want to be afraid here anymore." He sat at the table, staring out the window. "I don't know how to help you." "You don't have to help. You have to be there." He nodded. Then he got up and left. It rained that night. Not a downpour, not a thunderstorm, just a light, sticky rain, as if someone were squeezing the last drops of patience out of the sky. Mariana sat on her bed in the dark, listening to the creaks, the drops, the footsteps behind the wall. It felt as if even the house was tired of itself. In the morning, she woke up from the cold. Someone had turned off the heater. The blanket was gone, neither the old one nor the new one. Only a draft and a sigh full of exhaustion. She got up, threw on a robe, and went to the kitchen. Nothing there. Not even the kettle had been put on. For the first time in many years, no one was waiting for her to do anything. There was a note on the refrigerator. "The cleaning agency is coming today. You can rest." The note was unsigned. The handwriting was female, someone else's. Marianne stood at the stove, slowly folded the towel, and put it in a drawer. Not because she was asked to, because she couldn't look at it. Wet, crumpled, useless. She went to Esther's room. She knocked. There was no answer. She opened the door slightly. An old woman was sitting in a chair, wrapped up to her head, as if afraid of the light. "Can I do anything?" Esther didn't turn around. "Not anymore." "Are you feeling ill?" "I don't care." "Esther, you've been around for too long. Now I'm tired of your kindness. It's clingy. And it just complicates things." The words didn't hit her like slaps. They were too quiet. It was as if Mariana wasn't a person, but a mistake in the system that needed to be quietly deleted without making a sound. She left. She closed the door. She returned to her room. She sat down. There was a photograph on the nightstand, a childhood photo, not hers. Liv had left it there. It was of a girl with bangs, laughing openly, holding a flatbread in her hands. In the background were hands that looked like hers. But the face was not visible. Only the outline. A shadow. Mariana took the photo, slowly folded it in half, then again. The paper cracked, not from force, from time, like her. Then she went to the window and opened it. It smelled of rain and something else, something she couldn't name. It smelled of absence. No one called her anymore. No one asked for her. No one wondered where she was. She had disappeared and no one had noticed. Or maybe that was exactly what everyone wanted. Mariana didn't sleep that night. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, where streaks from old leaks glistened. She used to imagine that they were like maps. You could choose a route, draw a path to a better life. Now they were just stains, dead, like everything she believed in. She searched her memory for days, the days when she was afraid to ask for a room. When she first handed Esther a spoon, when Thomas said, "Stay until we figure things out." He didn't even look at her then. He just said it like a phrase from a business letter. Until we figure things out. 5 years. 5 years, and all that was left was a crumpled note and silence. She stood up, took her coat without buttoning it, and went out onto the porch. It was damp. The rain had washed away the dust, but the mud remained. The ground squelched under her feet. Her shoes got wet almost immediately. In the garden, she stopped at an old bench. She and Liv used to sit there, discussing captains and strong women. Now the bench seemed foreign. Like a scene from a play she was no longer in. "Who am I?" she whispered into the darkness. And for the first time in many years, she received no answer. Not from herself, not from the world. She sank down onto the bench, sat down, and pulled her knees up to her chest. Silly, of course. 40 years old, a woman who had worked all her life, and now she was sitting in the night like a little girl forgotten at a bus stop. Suddenly, her mother's voice popped into her head. Long dead, long since faded from memory. "If you keep quiet, others will decide everything for you. And then they'll ask you, 'Why are you complaining? You agreed to it.'" She hadn't answered then. She hadn't answered later. And now, the answer had to come not in words, but in a choice. She sat there until dawn. The rain stopped, water dripped from the trees, and something seemed to let go in her chest. Quietly, without drama, without loud vows. She simply understood. No one would come for her. No one would stand up for her. If she didn't get up, she would remain on that bench. Until the end, in her role, in the shadows. The morning was dull. The house stood in semi-darkness, as if it didn't know whether a new day had begun. The hallway smelled of musty canvas and warm milk. Someone was trying to pretend that everything was fine. Marianne returned from the street, wet, with drops on her collar, but she wasn't shivering. For the first time in a long time, it was dry inside. Empty? Yes. Quiet? Yes. But not damp. And that meant a lot. She took off her coat and hung it neatly on a hook. She went into the kitchen and poured herself some water. Not for anyone else, just for herself. She drank it calmly, without rushing. On the table was the same note as yesterday. "No cleaning today." Mariana didn't flinch. She wasn't offended. She just crumpled up the paper and threw it away. She went to Esther, without fear, without her usual bow of the shoulders. "I need to get my things," she said from the doorway. "Today." Esther looked up, slowly. "Are you leaving?" I'm going to live." "What, isn't that the same thing?" "It used to be, not anymore." The old woman stared at her for a long time, as if checking to see if she was bluffing, or blackmailing her. "Aren't you afraid they'll disown you?" "They already have. I just used to erase the ink. Now they can erase it themselves." Marianne turned and went to her room. She took out her suitcase, not to leave, but to choose. What to take, what to leave. Not things. Herself. Liv appeared in the hallway. She saw her with the suitcase and froze. "Are you leaving?" Mariana knelt down to be at her level. "Number. I'm just not waiting to be put on someone's list anymore." "Mom said you want to take everything from them?" "No." I want to get myself back, at least." Liv was silent. Then she rummaged in her pocket and handed her a hair tie, a simple, blue one. "For luck. It helped me when I fell off the stage." "Thanks," Mariana smiled. "I'll need it. I'm going on stage today, too." When she returned to the hall, almost everyone was already there. Molly, Annabelle, Esther, Thomas. They were sitting there, waiting, as if her actions were a meeting, not a life. Mariana walked past without apologizing, without explaining. She just stood up, straight ahead, without holding her hands together or looking at the floor. "I'm not a thing. I'm not a mistake. I'm not silence." And even if they didn't answer for the first time in this house, she didn't wait for a word in response. "She's not even family," Molly said, looking at Thomas as if squeezing agreement out of him. "You understand that this is just a mistake, a delusion, a refuge for someone else's fate." Marianne stood by the window. Behind her was a voice. Behind the glass was a garden where apple trees had recently blossomed. Now everything was gray. And that was fitting, too. "Thomas?" Molly repeated more sharply. "Or do you want her to stay here, with her papers, her keys, her rights?" Thomas stood up. Slowly. He was silent for a long time, as if he were choosing not a side, but himself. "I don't know," he said. "I thought I did, but—" Molly exhaled. "That's it. She's not living here anymore." Marianne turned around. She looked at everyone. Esther, tired, Annabelle, angry, Thomas, lost. "You're all talking about me as if I'm not in the room." "You're only here because we let you be," Annabelle said. "No," Marianne took a step forward. "I'm here because you couldn't handle your own lives. And I was convenient, quiet, dirt that could be wiped away and forgotten. Only, dirt is human too. And when you wiped it away, I felt it." She walked over to the table and placed the door key, the paper the lawyer had left, and the blue rubber band Liv had given her on top of it. "I'm leaving, but not because I lost. Because I don't want to be in a family where people are thrown out with the trash along with potato peelings." Esther raised her head for the first time. "You think we didn't love you?" "No. I know you didn't. But I stayed anyway, because I believed that love wasn't a gift. It was work. And I worked. But every job has to have a result. You lived with him, with my son, without a name, without status. Just like that," Molly snapped. "You thought we'd say, 'Good for you'?" Thomas suddenly stepped forward. His voice was soft but firm. "No, Molly, you've got it all wrong." He looked at everyone as if he were seeing his family as strangers for the first time in his life. Then he looked at Marianne. "She's my wife." The words came out simply, without drama, but in the silence that had reigned for so many years, they were like an earthquake. "What?" Annabelle breathed. "We got married 2 years ago. It's just, no one asked." Molly slowly sat down. Esther was silent. She looked at her son and didn't recognize him. It was as if the old man she had raised had suddenly become a man. "Why didn't you say anything?" was all she asked. "Because you wouldn't have heard me anyway." Marianne looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, there was no resentment, only gratitude. Not for his words, for the fact that he had stood up after all. The morning was gray again, but this time it was different. Mariana stood at the same stove where she had cooked soup for Esther for 5 years in a row. Water was boiling in a pot. She threw in 2 bay leaves, without hesitation, without looking back, because now she could. There was only 1 cup on the table. Heron round, with a chipped edge. She didn't hide it in the cupboard or replace it with a nice one for guests. She didn't need to pretend anymore. The garden outside the window was empty, but there was no loneliness in it. Just a pause, like after a scream, when you can finally breathe. In the corner stood that very photograph, bent but not thrown away. Now it was on the shelf, in a frame. Not out of pride, out of acceptance. Thomas entered the kitchen, without a word. He took the second cup, poured himself some water. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Mm-hmm," she nodded. No confessions, no promises, just two people, at the table. Nothing more, nothing less. When he left, Mary Ann sat down by the window. She put her hands on her knees. The light shone on her face. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to disappear. She was. She simply was. If you watched until the end, then this story touched you as much as it touched us. Write the word visible in the comments if you believe that every person deserves to be seen. And remember, sometimes one voice is enough to break a lifetime of silence.